Welcome again to this CAV TV program, Thoughts and Talk. Our guest today is Dr. David Kendall, Professor of Economics and Finance and Chair of the Department of Business and Economics here at UVa-Wise. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Kendall has an unusually diverse and rich professional background in academic, governmental, and private business sectors. He was a senior research economist for the Research Triangle Institute, served as Dean of the Business School at St. Edmunds University, and was Chief Economist and Director of Research for Empire Funding Corporation of Austin, Texas. I also noticed on his vita that Dr. Kendall served in the U.S. Navy submarine service, which I'm sure prepared him for the depths of economic philosophy. He has published numerous articles on government regulation, tax policy, and marketing. Professor Kendall is currently working on a book on economics and ethics, which we will discuss today. Joining us are three student questioners, from whom we will hear later. Laura K. Rogers is a student coordinator of this program. She is a senior administration of justice major, and she has served in many leadership positions at this college, on the SGA Senate as a resident advisor, creating the college debate club, the Socratic Society, and involvement in the honors program. She plans upon graduation to work in law enforcement while pursuing graduate studies. Katie Sutherland is a sophomore communications major at UVa-Wise. She was the Clintwood High School salutatorian. She has been invited to the White House. She participated in the summer enrichment programs at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville in the summers of 2005 and 2006, studying statistics, Japanese culture, and journalism. She is currently an SGA senator. Zachary Blake is an accounting major with interests in philosophy, theology, finance, and history. I should like to begin by asking you, Professor Kendall, about your book that you're working on, which I've read selections of, and perhaps not since Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations has an economist looked at the moral or ethical aspects of economic freedom. So could you just briefly summarize why you chose to write this book and kind of what it's about?
Sure, I'll do my best to give you a cogent summary. I guess the foundations and roots of this book go back over my entire academic career, professional career, some 30, 35 years. It just has been the case with me. I was classically trained at North Carolina State University in what we could call standard neoclassical economics, which is heavily mathematical and heavily model-based and theoretical. And I didn't really have too much interest in philosophy per se until much later in my career, my academic career. And I would say over the past 10 or 15 years, the philosophical side of science has captivated my interest more and more. But one of the things that has captured my interest and attention over the past several years is what seems to me to be clearly the case that capitalism has won the isms war, which dates back at least 100 years or so. Even people who style themselves as Marxists admit that capitalism produces prosperity for humans. That's no longer even debatable. It's not even an interesting question. And it seems to me that what has happened, though, as that point has been pretty much conceded by one and all, that if you want to have human prosperity, that you're going to have what most people think of as capitalism. You're going to have to use capitalism to get that. But now, in more recent times, even though that point has been conceded, there are still millions and millions of people around the world, as I say in my book, who absolutely revile capitalism.
Because it doesn't have that moral foundation.
Well,
They think it doesn't
but
have
well now, yeah,
Right.
that's where the front lines of attack are
Right,
now.
right.
Now, since capitalism obviously is successful in producing human prosperity and human well-being, now we're supposed to revile capitalism because it's immoral, not fair, doesn't produce equality, it's not green.
Right.
Any number of things, but the title of my book, The Morality of Capitalism, really has two central themes, two propositions that the whole book is about supporting, defending, and making. The first one is very close akin to the title of the book. The first theme, the first proposition that I make, that I offer up, is that capitalism is moral. The second, which some people will find even more provocative, if that isn't provocative enough, is that capitalism is the only system of political economy that is moral.
That is moral.
That's right.
Well, that's quite an argument. I can't
It
wait
is.
to hear the defense of that. So you are saying that both the internal system of capitalism or free market economics not only is efficacious, not only produces prosperity,
Right.
but is moral, and it is the most or only,
It's the only one.
the only
It's a strong
moral,
statement.
and is that because of its intrinsic morality, or because, as I think you suggest in your book, that it allows and requires morality outside the sphere of economics?
Well, it is, capitalism, as it turns out, is the only system of political economy that is based on what I take to be morality in the first place.
Which is what?
Well, indeed. So it's a good entree or segue into part one of the book. In fact, the book has three parts. Part one is titled Morality, because if you're going to title a book The Morality of Capitalism and you're going to make the claim that capitalism is moral, you're going to have to spend some time talking about what morality is. And that's what part one of the book does.
Right.
Part two of the book then addresses itself to what capitalism is and what capitalism is not. And finally, part three of the book brings them together and makes the arguments that demonstrates, and I hope to be a compelling and interesting way.
So
that
summarize
capitalism-
part one. What is it about
Okay, well-
capitalism that,
well,
or
let
what
me-
is morality?
what is morality?
That then capitalism fulfills?
As you know, as a political philosopher yourself, and an author, an academician, a scholar who's written voluminously on these topics, millions, literally millions of words have been written about what morality is. I make the case that it's actually really simple. It's really quite plain and simple. And in fact, in my book, perhaps a little bit pretentiously, I call it the moral imperative.
Right, right.
What is morality? Well, it is stated, in my judgment, most simply, most understandably, and unequivocally by what I take to be and call the moral imperative. And that is simply, do not compel another rational or sentient being unjustly.
Mm-hmm.
In short form, do not compel.
Do not force
Force,
others to do.
force is the most obvious form of compulsion, certainly. If
Also include manipulation. wouldn't
If
it?
I hold a gun, yes, if I hold a gun on you and tell you that you should be giving me your money now, that's clear. Everybody understands that that's compulsion. But it's also the case that you can compel someone with guile.
Right.
You can defraud
Manipulation.
someone. That also
Fraud.
is compelling another.
Right.
It's really, I contend in part one that we all know and we all agree what morality is.
Right.
Even though
To
there are a
not
lot of people
steal.
saying, no, we don't agree about that.
Well, as the Bible says, the law of God is written on the heart, or you might say the conscience, or Adam Smith, the moral sense. But we
Yes.
do know right and wrong.
I claim that
Inherently.
I claim that everyone
Everyone
comes to
knows.
know what is moral and what is not moral. Of course, I spend a fair amount of time in part one talking about how we come to know that.
Right.
But in my judgment, by the time we reach the age of maturity, whatever that may be for various ones of us, by the time we attain...
For me, it's 50.
Maybe, I'm not sure I'm there yet. But the notion of attaining rationality, my claim is that all rational beings do in fact know what is moral, and that they know it to be the moral imperative. Do not compel another in any way, for any reason, unjustly.
Okay, so it's basically what John Locke said, and British liberalism is one of our foundations in America, that we have natural rights to life, liberty, and property, that to violate those is evil, to steal, kill, and so on. And that Locke says we have that moral law written on our souls,
Certainly.
or through reason, known through reason, so humans naturally know at the age of maturity that it's wrong to steal, kill, and so on. So you're saying that a just society would respect that innate morality, whether you say it's from nature, or Jefferson said from nature and nature's God, whether you say it's just in reason, but the idea is that a just society is one that respects that, what do you call it, autonomy or moral?
Well, I would agree, I would certainly agree with that for a society to be just, it's going to have to be first moral.
Right.
Now, it's interesting that Locke broke out several categories, as do other philosophers, of human rights. Of course, Robert Nozick talked extensively in his book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, about rights that humans have. And of course, as we all know, our founders of the Constitution of the United States placed a lot of weight on the notion of inalienable rights, rights that cannot be separated from an individual. I state in my book, and I think this is, I hope I defend it well, that we actually all have but one right.
Which is?
Each of us as a soul, a person, a rational being, has but one right, and that right is not
To be coerced.
to be compelled by another.
Okay.
And if you think about it, if everyone respected that one right and held it to be paramount, if they valued that one right that they have and that everyone else has as well, just about everything else that we consider a problem goes away.
You even say in your first chapter that the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is an expression of that.
Oh, absolutely. The moral imperative, as I call it, is not at odds with the golden rule. It's certainly not at odds with the golden rule. It's not at odds with Kant's moral imperative either. I just think, in fact, it's entirely consistent with both of them. I just contend that it is blindingly simple, and that everyone
Right.
does and can
Well, that's
understand
exactly
it.
what Locke says, because because I don't want to be coerced. I want my freedom, rights to life, liberty, and property. I know somehow innately I can't violate your rights, coerce you, use you, because Locke would say then it will eventually lead to me having
Oh, absolutely.
my freedom taken away.
The golden rule, by the way, as you know, is also called the rule of reciprocity.
Right.
The ethic of reciprocity. Now, I claim in part one of the book that humans know things in just two ways. We won't get too involved in that, but I claim that. And they know whatever they take themselves to know and do know in just two ways. They know by their senses, experience, experientially then. They come to know things, they take themselves to know things. The other equally important way that people know things is by reason alone. And my claim is that we can know, and most of us do know, that the moral imperative is right by reason alone. And that reason is, indeed, by reciprocity. If I say to you, Garrett, I have the right to compel you, I can take your things, I can kill you if I want to, I can enslave you if you want to, what am I doing? I'm implicitly saying, you must also have the right to do that to me.
Right.
And so it is based entirely on the logic of reciprocity. Indeed, in the book I present a syllogism to that effect. And so I claim that we can know and do know what is moral by reason alone.
Well, isn't
That's
it what,
not how we first come to know it,
Isn't
of course.
that what both St. Thomas Aquinas in
Yeah.
Catholic theology and Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration says is a self-evident truth?
Yes, absolutely.
In other words, your experience and your reason provides the evidence.
Right. I claim that we first learn compelling another. I use as an example, as a device in part one of the book, an example of stealing.
Right.
And we first come to know, well, most of us first come to understand that stealing is wrong because our parents tell us it is. They say, well, you shouldn't be stealing things. And so, of course, testimony of others is how we first come to that notion. But then what happens, a little later on in life, someone steals something from us. And guess what? Now we know it experientially.
You know how it feels.
We know in our bones.
It feels terrible, yes.
It feels bad to us. And then a little later on, as we mature and steal something ourselves, perhaps, and maybe we don't do that when we're mature, but we come to reflect on it.
You feel guilty.
We even feel guilty about it. But then it really is the case that when we reach our full rational capacities, most people, I do believe, can and do come to understand that it's wrong for me to steal the property of others, because if I think it's right for me, it must be right for them, and I know I don't want them stealing my stuff.
Good. Now, if you'll
It's
forgive me
idea
because
of
of our
reciprocity.
limited time, we
Sure.
could talk about this one point for 30 years.
We could.
But I do want to cut to the chase and move to Chapter 3.
Yes.
Okay, you've described well, I think, your theory of morality, your view of morality, and why capitalism is moral. In what ways in our country now, because this is a big debate, is the society or the government violating that standard of morality, and how would a free market view correct that?
Government is, as Robert Nozick argues and very persuasively pointed out, government is the preeminent compeller of people. Government, by the way, when I use government, I have specific faces in mind. In a blog that I sometimes write in and used to write in frequently, following a very famous article, it was written years ago, I call government the 545. There are 545 real persons. I sort of object to thinking of government as an amorphous blob, which most of us tend to do. We fall into calling collective nouns, anthropomorphizing them so easily. Government's real people. Government.
500, is that Congress?
That would be 435 congressmen, 100 senators, 9 Supreme Court justices, and 1 president. We know their names. We know where they live. They, in fact, are our government.
Okay, so how are they doing it? How are they?
They compel us.
Compelling.
If there is any kind of nation state, any kind of political economy whatsoever that compels people unjustly, that's immoral.
Unjustly meaning they don't consent to it.
Unjustly, let's talk about it. Unjustly is an important word, obviously. What would be unjust? What would be just compulsion? Well, the typical argument when people first come to the thoughts that I present in my book is, well, parents compel children all the time, don't they? And I agree, yes, they do, but that's not unjust compulsion.
But they're minors, yeah.
Because they're not
Right.
rational beings. Nobody,
Right.
especially parents, think that children are rational. And they don't compel them, by the way, with intent of malice. When a parent does compel a child with malice and intent to harm, we don't consider that just
So you think the
compulsion.
government does it with malice?
I think that the government, the people who are government operatives, I don't even like, every time I say the word government myself, it makes me cringe.
You want to
because
say
I wanted to say
people in
the people
government.
who are the government operatives. Yes,
Right.
they do compel us. Do they compel us with malice? No, I don't think they. I don't think that most people who are government operatives have in mind, I'm wanting to harm someone. I don't think so. But they are compelling us.
And aren't they saying, I'm compelling you for this group or the public good?
They do, and there's one of my favorite whipping boys, the public good. I'd like someone to give a meaningful definition to the public good.
Public good.
I challenge my students in Foundations of Economics every semester to see if they can come up with any set of words whatsoever that rings a bell for that term.
Public good is taking your money and giving it to
Well,
me.
that certainly would be good for you. Right? It certainly would be good for you.
But you're part of the public too.
What the public, as I explain it, and Katie, one of our student panelists over here, certainly will attest to this. I tell them in Foundations of Economics to contemplate this thought very carefully. There is no such thing as the public good. There is no such thing as the social good, because there is no such thing as a social mind. Mm-hmm. We are individuals. Each of us has but one mind. I challenge people to be certain that anybody else even has a mind besides themselves. They can't even know that for sure, even though I take you to have a mind, Garrett, all the outer
I wouldn't
appearances.
assume that. No.
I can't experience your mind.
Right.
The very notion of the public good is a verbal bludgeon that misleads us into thinking that there might be something that we all publicly
So you think they're
is
using
good.
it deceitfully?
I think that politicians, by and large, use any device they can find to get elected.
Why would
and to
they
get
do that? I mean,
people
if
to
they
vote for
know
them.
the moral good, which is if I do this to somebody else, it might be done to me, why do they keep doing it?
I have no idea. Plato, of course, thought that when people do bad things, they do it out of a kind of ignorance.
Ignorance, right.
He thought that if people truly knew what was good, they would do it. I make a point of that in my book and refer to Plato's argument. We have something akin to that in economic theory that I call the fundamental hypothesis of economics. They're very close, akin to each other. But let's not go down that road. But so why all of us at some time or another have committed immoral acts.
Not knowing they would come back to haunt us.
We thought maybe, we probably didn't think very much about it.
Didn't think at all. Yeah.
Probably didn't think very much at all about it. We were operating in the short run. We thought, well, this seems like I would enjoy, in the book, have Tyro, who's one of my interlocutors in the dialogues, having his iPod stolen. And Solon, of course, gets him to admit that Tyro himself probably stole something once, right? And then Tyro turns the tables and said, what about you, Solon? And Solon himself has to admit,
He admits that
I
he's
stole
done that,
something
yeah.
too. So we at one point in our lives, we all of us, have behaved immorally. My contention is quite, I think surprisingly, and at odds with, quote, common wisdom, most of us, most of the time, behave morally.
Right.
We just simply do. We come to regret our immoral acts, and as I say in the book, if not until on our deathbed, we come to know that I did behave immorally then, and I wish I hadn't done it.
Right.
We all know that.
If you have a moral sense, then if you violate the moral law, you're going to feel guilty.
You will.
You may try to cover it up with excuses or drink or suicide, but that suggests what you say, that really we know at some elemental level what is wrong. We're doing it anyway because we're ignorant or sinful or whatever you want to call it. But
I claim that politicians, while not evil people, do behave immorally, and they know they're behaving immorally. They know that they're compelling people. They know that they're pandering to people who want them to do things in a particular way for the benefit of those particular people.
okay, so what sort of changes would we see if the government ever decided to recognize this moral standard? Just
Oh
give me
my
some
goodness.
specifics about policies or changes in law or practices.
Right, right. Well, the first thing that goes right out the window, and by the way, wasn't in the window in the first place when this country was founded, would be mandatory taxation, compulsory taxation. If you have a nation state, a government that holds as its highest duty, as Robert Nozick said, its only justifiable duty is to keep people from compelling each other,
Right.
the so-called night watchman state.
The police power.
That's it.
Right.
They can only wield that power for what purpose? To keep people from compelling each other.
So the
And
taxes are justified, but just to fund the police, the courts,
well,
the army.
you know, back in the days of Benjamin Franklin, when a bunch of folks decided that they wanted something that somebody might claim would be in the public good, whatever that could possibly mean, what did they do? Well, they didn't go out and say, we're going to collect taxes now. What they did do is they went out and said, will you contribute to this good cause? We'd like to build a library now. We'd like to pave some streets now because, you know, they're so dusty here in Philadelphia. Would you contribute? And people did. People do understand when things are good for them, and they're willing to support those things. But as soon as you collect taxes at the point of a gun, and by the way, here in the United States, just like every other nation state, that's how taxes are collected. If you don't think so, try not paying your taxes. When the sheriff comes to get you and you refuse to go, that's when the gun will come out. Okay, so that's compulsion. So you ask, well, how would life be if we had nation states and governments that refused to compel others? We wouldn't have compulsory taxes.
Wouldn't have
for
any
one thing.
taxes.
Well, no, government would have revenue. There are things that we want governments to do for us.
Right, even Nozick says police, defense.
Well, sure. As it turns out, it only takes a small number of people who are willing to be immoral to require all of us to defend ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, defending oneself from the compulsion of another is not
Well, that's right.
unjust compulsion.
But
That's
Madison
certainly
found, I
just.
mean, the problem in early America was that during the Articles of Confederation,
Yeah.
during the American Revolution, when we didn't have central government compulsion to tax,
Right.
to support
Didn't
the,
have until
the army
1913.
to fight the war, and we were about to be defeated and strung up in London,
Yeah.
because the states were not coerced. They were allowed to voluntarily submit money to
Absolutely.
support the Union. And so Madison and others argue that, you know, we need a stronger union, partly to tax, to support those things to protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property, which is basically the military, the police, the courts. And, oh, no, you're not going to quote from your book.
I am actually,
Now, that's
because
not fair.
no, it is
Quote
fair.
from your
I
own
have
book.
to. I have to do this because I can't remember it.
The one
I have this.
I was supposed to have read, and
I have this
Apparently I
certain
missed
weakness
something.
of mind, and I want to quote from it, but you know what? As it turns out, I'm not going
he's
to.
using his college-supported
iPad. Turns out it's in chapter 6, and I only have chapters 1 through 5 here.
Oh, hallelujah.
But it goes to your question. Let me see if I can paraphrase it, since I certainly can't quote it. It's from a quotation by Ayn Rand, which does the greatest justice to saying how things will be if we have nation states that don't coerce.
Mm-hmm.
If we have capitalism, because that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is based really on two principles, two foundational, essential principles. The first is that individuals own stuff,
Right, private property.
private property. And the second is voluntary exchange. Everything is
Free,
I use the word
voluntary.
exchange in its broadest possible conception, not just I'm trading my bicycle for your baseball mitt. That's certainly exchange. We're exchanging right now, and we're not doing it by compulsion. We are voluntarily exchanging right now. We're offering up our ideas to anyone who later on would voluntarily want to watch this program and think about it. In a society that is truly capitalistic, all exchange, all interactions, if you will, between rational beings must be voluntary. That, by the way, is what makes capitalism, true capitalism, the only system, social system of political economy that could even possibly be moral, because every other system that you can mention, every other system that humans have ever had truck with in the past relied on what? Yes, compulsion.
Force. Yeah.
Force. And in its most bodacious physical way, as a matter of fact.
Right.
We just had a speaker here at this college who has written a book, The Better Angels of Human Nature. Steven Pinker was his name, I believe. Did I get that right?
Pinker, yeah.
Pinker, who made the case that, my goodness, people have no idea how violent our human past was. And we're getting better at it. He makes the case that we're not nearly as violent now as we used to be. And maybe his case is a good one, and it probably is, because I think we probably are less violent than we are today. But every other form of political economy, I like that term, political economy, and I explain it in my book. You can't really separate economics from politics. That's an impossible mission.
Right.
That unfortunately my brethren economists put their foot on that path many years ago, but you can't really do that. But every other system of political economy, try some, name them. Autocracy, despotism, socialism, communism, you name it, whatever ism you like, what does it entail? It entails one set of people, sometimes a very small set indeed,
Right.
compelling everybody else to do whatever it is the small set wants done.
Well, this is certainly a very thoughtful and provocative, and I would love to go on for days just to, bring out more, and we will, when the book is finished, we'll have this discussion again. But we do want to move on to our student questioners, beginning with Laura K. Rogers.
Welcome to Thoughts and Talk, Dr. Kendall.
Thank
we thank
you.
you immensely for the time you've given us today to interview you. It's definitely been very intriguing and thought-provoking, as Dr. Sheldon mentioned. There are a lot of questions I have for you, and unfortunately I'm going to have to pick one. So, are the police and military justly compelled in enforcing the law of the land? And you can ask follow-up questions if you don't understand.
Repeat that again for me.
It's okay. Are police or the military, either one or both, justly compelled in enforcing the law of the land?
Are they themselves justly compelled?
Yeah, as a whole, yes.
I don't see that the military and the police are being compelled. I think they may be compelling
Compelling
others.
the people.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
no. If I understand your question, let me see if I'll restate it, and you can say, well, yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is it just for the police and the military to compel others?
I
Yeah.
think she's
Is
saying,
it moral?
are they compelled to do their job, or are they doing it voluntarily?
That's another way to put it in ways.
I presume they're doing it voluntarily. They're not being, nobody's holding guns on them. So let's assume that they are. Policemen are behaving in a way that they are being asked to behave. It is not the case, unfortunately, as Madison said, referring to humans not being angels, or he made some statement about if men were angels, we would have no need of government. And in my book, I say, well, an equally reasonable proposition would be that if men were angels, since men are not angels, don't expect government to be angelic. All right, so you can turn the tables on it.
Oh, that's a good one.
The military and the police as Robert Nozick points out, will be required, as even Ayn Rand, who is the foremost proponent of true capitalism that ever wrote a word, and she wrote many about it.
Also, libertarianism, is that what you'd call
Well,
it?
libertarianism is based on the principle of non-aggression. The whole foundation of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, which is the same as what I'm saying, only I'm broadening it.
So
They're
we need the
thinking
police,
mostly-
because some people are violent and need
Yes.
to be restrained, but I think what Ms. Rogers' question
I
was,
maybe don't understand
are
the
the
question.
police being compelled by the state to do their job, or the army?
No, I don't think so. Nobody's holding guns on them.
So it doesn't make them,
So they're doing it,
So-
but you join the
I
police,
presume they're doing it voluntarily.
you join the police, you know you're going to have to arrest people, you know you're going to be shot
Yes.
at, and
Which is a worthy thing to do if you are doing it for the right reason.
yeah.
Okay.
If you say, I'm going to be a policeman, or I'm going to be in the military because I do want to protect, I do want to enforce the moral imperative,
right.
Go.
and I will be moral myself. See,
Yeah.
to follow up again on Madison's comment, we do need angelic government operatives because they must be committed absolutely. If we're going to have a just society, if we're going to have a prosperous society, we're going to have capitalism. What does that mean? That means our people who are in government are going to have to be first and foremost proponents of the moral imperative.
So they only act as we
Do not
strive in
compel.
our country to use the police only when someone violates someone else's
Only
rights.
there's only, I agree 100% with Robert Nozick, there's only one justification for using compulsion, and that is to resist compulsion.
Right, crime.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can't allow people to violate the moral imperative.
Good. I think that answers the question. Miss Sutherland, your question.
I also agree with Laura. It's been very interesting sitting here and listening to your talk, and I've enjoyed it. My question is since immorality is compelling another, then what about compelling indirectly? For instance, if someone makes a choice and then that leaves someone no choice, is that immoral, and is that actually indirectly compelling someone?
Well, I'm a little hesitant to use the word indirect, since I'm not sure when things are direct and when they're indirect.
Maybe you
But-
could give an example.
But I think
Sutherland?
I think I understand. Katie said, "What if you're put in a position where you have no choice?" Well, in I think it's chapter 4 of the book, I go through a variety of scenarios where people might question, well, is this a violation of the moral imperative or not? So let's take a couple of those.
Like what?
Here's one. The first one, in fact, is from the movie Forrest Gump. And this, by the way, was a scenario suggested by one of the students who took my class in the fall of 2011 by the same title, The Morality of Capitalism, which I'm going to be teaching again in the fall of 2013. Hopefully with the benefit of my book in print by that time.
Good.
Available. It's not totally there yet. I've got some work to do. Well, here's the scenario. Of course, we all saw Forrest Gump, and we saw Forrest out there, or Bubba rather, and it wasn't Forrest Gump himself. It was Bubba who found Lieutenant Dan severely wounded on the battlefield, and of course Lieutenant Dan begged him, "Leave me here. It's my fate to die. I don't want you to carry me to safety." And of course, Bubba compelled him. Bubba did compel Lieutenant Dan. Slung him over his shoulder, and off he went. Right? Saved him against
Against his will.
against Lieutenant Dan's express will. Leave me here. Was that immoral on Bubba's part? I use that as an example. The answer is no. It was not immoral. Why?
Why?
Because it was just compulsion, not unjust compulsion. Well, how do you figure that? Here's
right.
how I figure that.
Right.
Lieutenant Dan was not at the time rational. And we know that to be true because later on he was very thankful that he was saved. He wasn't rational. We have no duty to not compel someone who's not rational. We compel our pets to stay out of the street. We put up fences, and why? Well, they're not rational. We don't think that they could hurt themselves. We do the same thing with our children. So it is critical and key to understand that not all compulsion of one by another is unjust, but when it is, it's immoral.
Okay. Good. Does that answer your...
So back to Katie's question, you could be put in a position, look, if you're walking on the streets of New York and some thug comes up and sticks a gun in your ribs and says, give me your money, you're being mugged here, I want your money, would you be behaving immorally if you whirled about and gave him a karate kick and brought him to his knees? Answer, no. Of course you wouldn't be. Why? Because your compulsion of him is perfectly just by the principle of reciprocity. As Aesop said,
Right.
a thief has no reason to complain about being robbed.
Right. Good. Mr. Blake?
Yes, you spoke earlier on how we know things are moral.
Yes.
My question would be exactly how do we do that, because we have situations where, say my iPod is stolen, I may not like that, but how does that necessarily translate to the person who stole it was wrong to do so?
Well, the person who steals another's property is engaging in wrong behavior. Now, how can we know that it is wrong behavior? That's a very good question, by the way. And it is by reason, we know it in two ways, of course. We know that it's wrong because we sense that it is wrong. I make the point in part one of the book that our emotions are part of our sensory capacity. They're not. It's not the case that we have reason, our senses, and our emotions. No. Our emotions are part of our sensory apparatus, just as surely as I'm looking out here and seeing this light, it's sensory impression. Seeing is the response that my senses give to light. Well, when someone steals my iPod and I feel miserable about it and I feel violated, I feel hateful, I might even feel like I wish I could kick whoever stole my iPod if I just knew who it was. That is an emotive response, but that is part of our sensory capacity. So we know it that way. We also, however, know that if we steal something, at least most of us, and certainly I think all of us by the time we're on our deathbed, we come to regret that. We feel guilt. That's another sensory piece of evidence. But as I argue in the book, we don't know things by sensory experience alone. In fact, there are very few things that we can actually know, and certainly hardly anything by sensory experience alone. We know that stealing is wrong by reason alone. How? How is that? Well, that's, I think, precisely your question, Zachary. We know that stealing must be wrong behavior. Why? How do we know that? Here's how the argument goes. I claim that we are all ontologically equal. We know that we are ontologically equal. That's the very thing that people mean when they say we have rights. We all have the same, we have equal rights is the usual expression. Ontological means what just is.
What we are.
What we are.
So Locke says being of the same species.
We are all souls. I'm not afraid to use the word soul. I believe we are souls.
Being all human.
Being human, however you like it. If you don't like soul talk, fine. Just talk mind talk. We all have whatever you like. We all take ourselves to be on equal footing as beings. We are I call that ontological equality. So if we all agree that we are ontologically equal, that's the first premise, right? We agree that we're ontologically equal. Then if I steal from someone, I must be according them the right to steal from me.
Right.
But yet I don't want them to steal from me.
Right.
Therefore what? I can't steal from them. I know that. We all know that. I can't kill you. Why? Because I don't want you to kill me. It is called, and I call it in my book, the principle of reciprocity. What is moral and what is not moral is based utterly, and we know it utterly, finally, on the principle of reciprocity. By the way, another point that I make in the book right and wrong are not the same thing as good and bad. Those are very, very different concepts and ideas. My claim is that what is immoral is wrong behavior. If you think it's bad or good behavior, it's quite a different thing. That's a whole other line that will take too long to go down. But
Well, just
did
again
want to
to
put it
be,
in.
since you're an economist, just give me one example of how a correct, moral, or capitalist, or free, or libertarian, whatever view would change a single law. Give me an example of a
it's
single
easy.
law.
Yeah.
I know
Single
there are
law.
millions, but just give me an example of a single law that you think is violating this principle.
Yes, you have to put ethanol in gasoline, don't you? It's a federal law.
Okay.
You, under a capitalist political economy, you would not have to put ethanol in
You would not
gasoline.
have-
If someone wished to put ethanol in gasoline and try to engage someone in buying it,
Okay.
that's voluntary. You would have
Okay.
if you realize, if you think about it, Garrett, we don't need a sitting Congress to keep passing laws every year. For goodness sakes, if you think about it, 99.999% of all laws passed by Congress are for what purpose? They're not there to keep us moral. They are there to give advantage to one person or a group of persons economically over another.
Corn farmers in Nebraska.
Well, corn farmers love the fact
Ethanol.
that Congress said you have to have this much ethanol in gas. Oh, corn farmers, hey, that's good for corn farmers. By the way, let's broaden our purview. Why just restrict ourselves to the United States? If you had a capitalist society, we would not impose trade restrictions of any kind on anybody. Even if they said, well, we're not going to trade, we're going to put tariffs on on your computer equipment if you're trying to sell, or cars would be more
We wouldn't
likely.
do that back.
No, we wouldn't. We'd say, fine, if you insist on doing that. If you want to shoot yourself in the foot, it's your foot, right?
I remember a talk you gave at the old faculty colloquium
Yes.
down the chapel
Sure.
years ago. I don't know if you remember that. It was a talk on free trade.
Absolutely.
And how free trade always causes everyone to have more wealth.
Well, of course, of course. Look, the principle is so well known to economists and other philosophers. Economists don't think of themselves as philosophers, but they are. Voluntary exchange cannot possibly be anything but beneficial to the people involved in the exchange.
So you're saying
They wouldn't do it
in the
if they
ethanol
otherwise.
case, now the government wouldn't tell us we have to use gasoline with ethanol in it.
No.
If we wanted to, there would be someone selling. The market would provide
Sure.
green gas or whatever it is.
If people want
but
it.
if I, in my classic 1989 Cadillac, want to
Yes.
put real gasoline in, so the
Buy it.
carburetor doesn't have to be rebuilt
Yes.
every month, I wouldn't be compelled to
No,
use.
every pump you drive up to wouldn't say this product may contain 10% ethanol. You'd find plenty of pumps. My contention is you wouldn't find any pumps that contained ethanol because nobody in their right mind would do that, okay? Except by what? Compulsion, of course. Voluntary exchange is beneficial. Any kind of compelled exchange whatsoever is going to be for the benefit of some and to the detriment of some others.
Except for unreason, as Jefferson once said, except for children, madmen, and drunkards.
Yeah, there you go, and we don't take any of those people to be rational, right?
Right.
Exactly.
And I think on that note, we'll have to wrap it up, but thank you so much,
It's been
Professor
my
Kendall.
pleasure.
It's been great, and thank you all for participating, and all the staff who've worked on this edition of Thoughts and Talk.